There's a quiet moment that arrives without announcement. It slips in gently, almost unnoticed. A pause between sentences, a breath that lingers a little longer than usual. It often begins when the words grow heavier than the feelings they try to carry. When explanations start sounding like apologies. When sentences feel less like communication and more like permission being asked. Somewhere in the background of everyday life, a subtle tiredness forms. Not in the body, but in the voice. In the soft space where a person once felt the need to justify their presence, their choices, their silence, their becoming, and then one day the words do not come. Not out of defiance, not out of anger, but out of a quiet recognition that some truths were never meant to be negotiated. Something begins to shift, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. There's a certain way a person learns to speak when being misunderstood becomes familiar. Not louder, not sharper, but softer, slower, more careful. Words begin to arrive wrapped in explanation. Sentences stretch longer than they need to, as if hoping that enough detail might finally bridge the invisible distance between one inner world and another. Thoughts are gently reshaped before being spoken, so they can fit into shapes that feel easier for others to accept. Over time, something quiet begins to happen. A person no longer simply shares what is felt, they begin to prepare it, translate it, defend it before it is questioned, soften it before it is misunderstood. And in that preparation, a subtle fatigue settles into the voice. It does not feel dramatic, it does not feel like pain. It feels like a thinning, a slow wearing down of something once spontaneous. An invisible erosion of the simple act of being. In everyday conversations, explanations become small offerings, not just of information, but of belonging. A way of saying, this is who I am. This makes sense. This deserves space. Yet behind those gentle clarifications, there often lives an unspoken hope. That one day the words will not need to work so hard. That presence alone might be enough. Sometimes this hope hides inside the smallest moments. In the pause before replying to a message, in the hesitation before answering a simple question, in the quiet calculation of how much to say and how much to keep, a person might begin to feel that every expression requires context. Every boundary needs justification. Every preference must be explained gently, carefully, completely, and without realizing it, identity slowly becomes something that is performed, not simply lived. There are days when the explanations flow easily. They sound natural, they feel polite, they feel kind, and then there are days when they feel heavy, when the voice feels tired before the words are even formed, when silence begins to feel more honest than speech, not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it has started to feel like asking for permission to exist. In those quiet moments, something fragile begins to stir, a soft awareness that being understood has slowly become more important than being real. That clarity has begun to outweigh truth. That acceptance has started to feel conditional, as if it must be earned through explanation. And beneath all of it, a simple, unspoken question lingers gently in the background. What would remain if the words were allowed to rest? Not answered, just waiting. Long before explanations became sentences, they were feelings. They lived in the spaces between reactions, in the careful reading of rooms, in the quiet awareness of what was welcomed and what made others uneasy. Many people learn early that some parts of them are easier to receive than others. Some emotions are met with warmth. Some questions are gently redirected. Some silences are interpreted as distance. And so little by little, the inner world begins to adjust itself. Not through rules, not through instructions, but through observation. A child notices when excitement is softened to avoid being too much. When sadness is shortened so it does not linger. When curiosity is reshaped to fit the patience of the room. None of this feels like loss at first. It feels like learning, like belonging, like becoming understandable. Explanations grow quietly inside this emotional climate. They become a way to stay close, a way to remain safe, a way to make the self easier to hold. Over time, this way of being does not feel like adaptation anymore. It begins to feel like identity. A person may grow into someone who can describe themselves clearly, carefully, completely, while still feeling vaguely unseen. Because explanation can carry detail, but it cannot always carry truth. It can outline experiences without holding the weight of what they meant. It can describe choices without revealing the silence that shaped them. There are moments when a person senses this gap, when they have explained everything and yet feel quietly misunderstood, when their words are received but their inner world still feels untouched. This is often where a soft ache begins to form, not loud enough to be called pain, not sharp enough to demand attention, just a gentle feeling of being partially present in one's own life, a sense that something essential is always slightly ahead of the conversation, that the truest parts of the self move more slowly than language. And yet the habit continues, because it once protected, because it once connected, because it once felt like the safest way to be seen. But beneath the explanations, a quiet longing begins to surface, a longing to be known without translation, to be received without clarification, to be allowed to exist without becoming understandable first. It does not ask for change. It does not demand recognition. It simply waits, like a soft, unspoken memory of a simpler kind of presence. There's a gentle moment when a person begins to notice their own voice, not the sound of it, but the effort inside it. A subtle awareness of how often words arrive already carrying reasons, how many sentences begin with invisible defenses, how frequently explanations appear before anyone has asked for them. This noticing does not come as realization. It comes as stillness, a pause between speaking and preparing, a breath that lingers, a moment where something inside quietly wonders if it is safe to remain undefined. Psychology has a name for the human need to be legible, to feel recognizable inside the eyes of others. But in lived experience, it feels less like a need and more like a background gravity, a pull toward being shaped, softened, made easier to hold. The inner conflict lives here, between the comfort of being understood and the quiet ache of being edited, between the warmth of belonging and the gentle loss of something unnamed. There are moments when silence feels almost unfamiliar, as if the absence of explanation leaves a hollow space, a place where a person wonders who they are when they are not clarifying themselves. This space can feel tender, not because it is empty, but because it is unprotected. Here the mind may reach instinctively for words, for details, for reasons, and yet something else begins to stir. A softer voice, a quieter sense of self that does not arrive with footnotes, that does not introduce itself through context, that does not apologize for its presence. This is not a turning point that announces itself. There is no moment of decision, no visible shift, only a subtle change in weight. Explanations begin to feel heavier. Silence begins to feel fuller, not with certainty, but with something like relief. Not relief that promises answers, but relief that feels like being allowed to remain unframed. The words do not disappear. They simply begin to arrive less urgently, less carefully, less defensively. And in the quiet space they leave behind, a gentler kind of presence begins to settle. One that does not ask to be understood, one that does not hurry to be accepted. Just a simple, unadorned being, resting softly inside its own shape. There is no conclusion here, no declaration, only a softened awareness. A recognition that some truths do not need translation, that some presence does not require permission, and that sometimes when the explanations grow quiet, something deeper is finally allowed to be felt, not solved, not defined, just quietly, gently known.